Hey nerds! So, barely a year after gutting NASA, there is now quite suddenly an emphasis on bringing critical skills back into the agency, which is an interesting turn of events. You see, after a fairly sustained period of undermining scientific institutions, cutting funding, and generally encouraging the idea that expertise is something that is optional, the message has now shifted to we're going to need a lot of highly trained scientists and engineers if we want to build a moon base. Now, to be fair, that part is true. It's just you can't spend years hollowing that out and then immediately pivot to everyone back in because we're going to build an infrastructure on another celestial body. This all comes from a recent NASA announcement where they lay out plans to return humans to the moon. Now, we're not just talking about the Artemis missions that are coming up and actually should have happened the day that this video comes out, but with the way launches happen, I can't guarantee it has happened. So either bon voyage, good luck, or oh no, something terrible happened, or oh, they haven't gone yet. I really hope it's not the middle one. Oh Jesus, that would be very poor taste. But what I want to talk about is this announcement that they have made about basically speeding it all up. And not only that, but they want to build a permanent base on the moon by 2030. And I think that we should talk about the realities of building a base on the moon and why this is a completely unrealistic goal to be aiming for. And the timing of it all is kind of interesting, as well as the framing of the reasoning for it, which isn't fully explained. Let's be real. Now, like the rest of you, I love me a moon base. We have a penal colony and the moon is a harsh mistress. We've got the helium-3 mining in Duncan Jones's moon. And of course, we have the alternate history/future of For All Mankind. We love this idea of having this base and, you know, these glass domes, and you can just look out and see Earth in the distance and expanding out as humanity. But we have to be realistic about not just the cost of these things financially, but actually in terms of the requirements for the materials and the technology and the experience that we need in order to achieve this in a safe and reliable way. You see, the last time humans went to the moon, it took the better part of a decade to achieve it, with effectively unlimited funding and hardware that was never intended to be reused. And that was just to land, stay very briefly, and then leave. And now the goal it's not just to go back, but it's to build something permanent. It's very difficult to look at this recent statement and think that this is actually about the moon. It seems to have a lot more to do with the political climate, because nothing about the moon has suddenly become urgent. It's not like someone discovered it last week. There isn't a closing window on visiting the moon, and there's no queue forming behind anyone to get there. The only thing here with a fixed deadline is the political term, and they explicitly state that they want to achieve this before the end of President Donald J. Trump's term. And then the permanent moon base by 2030. Get 4 years away, guys. This is not how to set a timeline for something like this. You have to build a system, you have to test it, you have to make sure that it works reliably before you determine that you are going to go, and then maybe you can set a timeline. Here, it seems like the timeline is set and then everything is expected to catch up to it. But if nothing about the moon has changed, and the engineering certainly hasn't sped up overnight, then why is this suddenly being treated as if it's some urgent need? Now, there's an interesting line in the statement about a great power competition. Guys, what power competition? They say that success or failure will be measured in months, not years. Measured in months. This isn't the 60s. There isn't a space race on. Now, sure, there's activity, there are missions, but there's nothing that would justify this idea that everything now has to happen on a compressed month-by-month timeline. So what's driving it? Does anyone remember this post from Musk just a little while back? For those unaware, SpaceX has already shifted focus to building a self-growing city on the moon, as we can potentially achieve that in less than 10 years, whereas Mars would take 20 plus years. I don't know why I said potentially like that. It was weird. But what is Elon talking about? Like, what happened? Why did he change his mind so suddenly? What about his dream of Mars? Like, it's almost as if he finally realized that Mars is like really, really far away and really, really hard to achieve, and it won't happen in his lifetime. But that's the point here. It was never about the mission, it was about legacy. It's about what you get to say happened, and you're there to witness it. And the moon is a hell of a lot closer than Mars. You can get there in a few days, you can land, you can leave, and you can demonstrate that you've done it within the time frame that people can actually see. So if the goal is to show progress, like visible progress that people can then celebrate you for, the moon is a much more convenient target. Now, that's fine if this were just about doing another landing, but it's not. This isn't just going to the moon, planting a flag again, and then coming home. They're talking about building a base within 4 years. Something people can live in, something that has to work continuously. Now, if you want that to exist within the urgency that they're suggesting in the statement, then a lot of things would already need to be solved. And spoiler alert, you guys, like they're not. Firstly, you need a reliable way of getting to the moon and back repeatedly. You need landers that can go down, come back up, and do that again without being rebuilt from scratch every single time. You also need cargo missions that will run alongside the crewed ones, bringing equipment and supplies, replacement parts. Now, once you're on the surface, of course, you need somewhere to live. You need actual infrastructure, pressurized habitats, life support systems that can run continuously, systems for managing air, water, waste, and all of it has to be working without interruption. You need power, you need storage, you need redundancy, you need backup, you need communication, navigation. All of this has to be there in place working before you can even start to think about something like an enduring presence. Now, sure, we have experience of running these types of systems with the ISS, but something in low Earth orbit is very different than an actual structure on the surface of the moon. And not just that, but when you're actually on the surface, the moon itself is a challenge. There's no atmosphere. There's no pressure, there's no air, there's no protection from radiation. Now on Earth, we're shielded by both the atmosphere and the magnetic field, as are the astronauts on the ISS. On the moon, you don't get either. So anything on the surface is exposed to solar radiation and cosmic rays, as well as micrometeorites directly all of the time. Like, have you seen the surface of the moon and all the pockmarks? You can't solve this with having a slightly better spacesuit or a lander. If you want people living there long term, you're going to need some serious shielding, and that means putting habitats underground or covering them with meters of lunar material, which requires a lot of equipment. Now, because there's no atmosphere to distribute heat as well, everything depends on whether you're in sunlight or not. Do you know that a lunar day lasts about 2 weeks? So you get really long periods of extreme heat and then followed by really long periods of extreme cold. All of your systems have to be able to be capable of surviving both of those extremes. Now, also energy becomes a part of the problem because of the lunar day, because solar works in sunlight, but then you have 2 weeks of darkness to get through. So now you need large scale storage, you need alternative power sources, and you need all of this to be able to run continuously when you're not in sunlight. And then, of course, there's gravity. We have talked about this. The moon has about 1/6 of Earth's gravity, which sounds somewhat manageable, but the thing is we don't actually know what long-term exposure to that does to the human body. Now, we know that microgravity causes bone density loss. We know it causes muscle degradation, cardiovascular changes. We don't know where the threshold is for avoiding that, or whether 1/6 of Earth's gravity is enough. So even at the level of basic human biology, there are still really open questions as to how long astronauts can actually live in this gravity, or if there needs to be like centrifuges built to work on the moon to keep astronauts healthy. None of this is new information. We've known all of this for a really long time. We're talking about building systems that can operate in an environment with no buffer and no margin of error, and there's no easy way to fix things when they go wrong because you're on the freaking moon. This takes a lot of time and testing, and when I say testing, I mean testing on the moon. Coming back to the statement now, and like I said, how it just feels a bit detached from reality, because there's this section as well about frequent and affordable crewed missions. They're basically saying that they want to have landings every 6 months and then increase the tempo over time. Every 6 months. Now, this would be impressive if we were anywhere close to having a system that could support that. But at the moment, an Artemis mission itself is a major event. It takes years to prepare it. The hardware is complex. A lot of the hardware is single use, and even the parts that are being developed for reuse are still in testing. Nothing is finalized yet. So when they talk about doing this twice a year consistently, it's not an extension of what's being done now. It's a completely different way of operating. We're talking geostorm levels of sci-fi fantasy. It's not as simple as launching a rocket more often. Everything around it has to keep up. Reusable landers, systems on the surface that are already in place and working, supply chains running alongside the missions, everything running reliably, functioning every single time. The process of testing this type of a scenario takes time. If something goes wrong, you don't just like miss a launch and then just go again. You ground the system, you have to investigate it, you have to redesign, and that usually takes years. Now, right now, these missions cost billions. Even if that comes down, even if parts become reusable, you're still talking about a very expensive operation, and doing that twice a year, it's a lot of money. It needs a lot of people, a lot of very skilled people, which is probably why they say that they want to bring critical skills back into the agency. And I had to stop for a second when I read that. Because yes, you do need critical skills. That's not in question here. You need engineers, you need scientists, you need technicians, you need people who know how to design and test systems that have to work in environments like this. That has always been true. Those skills don't exist in isolation. They don't just like sit on a shelf somewhere waiting to be picked up again. It's not like you're just kind of hanging around going, I know how to do all this stuff, so your time has come. We need you now. Come on in. They come from years of education, years of experience, long-term projects, stable funding, institutions that people actually trust enough to build a career in. You can't spend years cutting funding, scaling things back, hollowing out programs, encouraging the idea, like I said, that expertise isn't useful or that it's interchangeable, and then suddenly pivot back to being like, oh no, we actually do need that. So we also kind of need it quite quickly because we've decided that there's a timeline of achieving this within 4 years. So come on, let's go. Even if you start investing again tomorrow, you're not instantly back where you were. You have to rebuild teams, you have to rebuild knowledge, you have to rebuild the kind of working systems that only come from people actually doing the work over time. And that process is slow. It has to be, because that's the time where you figure out whether things are reliable or not. Now, NASA isn't doing any of this on its own, right? There are contractors, sure, there's international partners, there's supply chains, all of them have their own timelines as well, and their own limitations, as well as their own points of failure. You're not scaling up one organization. This isn't just about going, oh, NASA, go faster. You're trying to coordinate an entire system that has to function together. So if you want to build a base on the moon, then you need to commit to long-term research and development. You have to encourage public interest in science and technology, and you have to follow the timelines that are set by the limitations of the science and the engineering, and more importantly of all, of clear safety protocols. This entire statement doesn't feel like this is about engineering or advancing science. It feels like it's an unrealistic timeline with the sole intention of creating a fabricated legacy for one man. It is so transparent, it is painful. Nothing about the moon is different than it was like 2 years ago. The engineering hasn't gotten faster, it's actually probably slowed down a bit. The challenges haven't gone away. They're not sitting on some breakthrough that suddenly makes all of this really easy. So all of the language about urgency, timelines being measured in months, about increasing the cadence of missions, this is a big, great power competition. This isn't coming from science. Now, please don't get me wrong here. I fully support the work of NASA, always have done. It is an incredible resource globally. I am excited about the Artemis missions. I really hope that the launch went well today. I'm so excited to see all of this happening in my lifetime. Whenever we work on new technologies, it does have a lasting impact on our lives, even if we don't get to see it immediately. But building a moon base only makes sense if you're treating it as a long-term engineering and science challenge. It can't just be about how quickly you can do it because of some imaginary 21st century space race so that you can put your name on something else. Now, if building a moon base helps bring people out of the anti-science movement and creates progress that would benefit everyone, then I am so freaking on board for this. But even I know people just want to be able to afford groceries, to go to the doctor, to buy a freaking house. So how are you now going to sell people on billions of dollars for a moon base after spending a decade undermining the work of scientists and engineers and eroding the public's trust in these institutions? I am not making this video to try to discourage this. Like, a moon base, guys, it would be freaking cool. Of course it would. I guess we're just going to have to see how this all plays out. But I promise you right now, it ain't going to be there by 2030. Absolutely no freaking way. Don't take this as me being pessimistic or negative about the work of NASA or about, science or technology or, looking at future missions. Like, guys, come on. This is like, I love all of it. I support all of it. I am so in favor of all of it. Take this more as me doubting that there will actually be a long-term interest and investment into this as a project. I would not be surprised if it gets gutted when the results don't come as fast as they want them to come, because they're not really willing to follow the actual timescales that the science and the engineering needs. And as soon as you're not able to deliver that mission, the interest will be lost. So yeah, I just, there's bits about the statement that I find a bit confusing and a bit too convenient in terms of timeframes and political climates that make me question as to what the intentions truly are with this concept of trying to build a moon base by 2030. But look, let me know what you think. Are you excited by the idea? Do you think that we have the technology and the infrastructure to be able to manage something like this? What do you think is the biggest challenge that we currently face with being able to actually have a moon base? And do you think that it will just end up as a penal colony like the moon is a harsh mistress? I wouldn't be freaking surprised, to be fair. No, it'll be like the Antarctic, right? It'll be just scientists in tiny little huts stuck there for 6 months at a time, going crazy. I would so go to the Antarctic if someone said, hey, do you want to come and do a research trip? 100%, without question. Anyway, I'm going to do a few more shorter videos like this about just things that are coming up in the news or just some everyday science, like, how do touchscreens work? Why is glass transparent? As well as book, TV, and movie reviews to keep on top with the things that are happening or that I'm reading about. But don't worry, there is still, of course, always going to be my once a month deep dive into some big topic in either science fiction or physics, or connected to both, basically. So let me know what things you want to know about, or anything that you see in the news, or anything that you would like me to kind of break down a little bit better. Thanks for watching. Stay nerdy.